My first few years in San Francisco was, you know, really an adventure. I got involved in a lot of music. Uh, Not only the rockabilly band, but jazz band, uh, classical rock band, all kinds of pop and country bands and stuff like that. It was really a fun time, and you know you could almost say that as as, as a guy who played music, I almost had my act together. And as always, it's tough to keep bands together, and all that. You got to be a little lucky and stuff like that. Um, but it was a great experience. I at this point, or at least at that point, I had played in just about every single club, in San Francisco, in some capacity. And the food was always incredible. I could go around the corner and get really good Mexican food. Or at this other part of town, you could get German food, or you name it, Chinese, food, even Polish food. I mean, it is just wide open. You know, I live near one of the bigger supermarkets in Northern California, so there was that. And eventually I was able to build a recording studio in the basement of my apartment. For some odd reason, because my drummer friend and myself, were dependable in paying our rent. The landlord was very nice to us, and we set up shop down there. We built a recording studio, 8-track reel-to-reel, kind of studio, and did a lot of good work with ourselves and plus other bands in the area. It was kind of like a good lifestyle for me. I was around 29, 30 years old, and ironically I moved there a week before the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, one of the biggest earthquakes in roughly 70 years, 70, 80 years. Well, I came out here a week into it, big earthquake. Well, I'm gonna stay, while like almost half the population of San Francisco was moving out because it just upset so many people. I thought, well, you know what? I'm gonna stay. How much worse can it get, right? San Francisco, of course, fun town. No complaint there. Um, and here we are, kind of on top of the world. I got another tech job, doing phone customer support for a particular type of ATM computerized driven fax machine. And so that was my start. San Francisco, especially in the early 90s, as you probably would expect or suspect, was a fun town. There were crazy people everywhere. And if you couldn't be crazy in San Francisco, you basically couldn't be crazy anywhere. That's as far as I was concerned. And there was music everywhere. One day I ended up watching a guy, at a bar, playing, kind of like 50s, rock and roll music, on his guitar. And he was a good singer, and, he sang Roy Orbison, he sang Elvis, and people like that. So I approached him during a break, and I said, "Hey, do you want a bass player?" And he said, "Sure." So I ran home and got my bass, got my amp, went back to the club, and I set up next to him for his next set. And while I spent, the past few years especially, um, playing, either original music or this trash art, kind of avant-garde music, I was here playing, rock and roll standards, and stuff that musicians typically learn first before they actually, went on to, all the other musical styles. It was a good gig, in terms of, not only did I get fed, beer, but I also got something to eat at the end of the evening, which was, largely a burger. It was from the grill, burger and fries and all that stuff. So it was wonderful, and it was every single Sunday, after lunch, I'd go over there and play for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon. It was there that I learned a lot about just playing music and playing rock and roll and that sort of thing. And other other musicians would come and join us, and play their songs. And it was sort of like rockabilly. It was sort of like rock and roll, rockabilly, a little bit of country western, and the kind of look where you had the high hair and the sideburns, and all that stuff. And it was just a fun time. San Francisco, was in those days, a real bohemian place. Everyone had a tattoo. Everyone, had their edge. And all that. My technical career really, became really stale. And at the point where, I worked for a lot of different startup companies. That was a big thing. Startup companies. And I eventually started working for a company, a technical company that was created by a commune, which was basically featured or at least modeled by the kibbutz, in Israel. And it was a company that was completely woman-owned, which was cool. It was the kind of office that was so cool, that they had a room dedicated for music, where there was a drum set, amps, guitars, a bass, and if you needed a 10-minute break, instead of hanging around the coffee machine, you could go in there and just play the drums, and it was really accepted. The commune itself was a commune where it was a polyfidelity commune, which was the only difference between the kibbutz and this. I mean, they all shared everything. They lived in multiple houses. They all ate meals together. All their income was, went into the same basket, and they voted on things, and what they were going to do and all this other stuff. But I met some great people there, who I would later play music with, and it was just a real San Francisco, natural kind of thing, real, what they call a native, San Francisco, business. So as time went on, music was, a big part of my life, and I finally got a, like a real stable job, that, which was right downtown San Francisco. It was easy to get to, and, and all that stuff. So there was that. And then I dabbled into public access TV, where I worked with a group called Sunday Night Blues, and we had 3 or 4 years of public access television that we broadcasted weekly.
My name is Bob. Welcome to the magic of oil painting. Today, we'll take a stark canvas. We're going to make it something into what it is not right now. Follow me. First, we're going to take a little bit of absinthe black. Apply it gingerly, gently, but with a force not really known to other colors. We'll get to the other colors in a moment. Follow me. First, go across the canvas, bring a stretch across the canvas. Take the tip here. Up and down, up and down, up and down.
Critics everywhere are calling Run, Swinger, Run the movie to see. Joel Siegel says Bernard Forget is brilliant, haunting, unforgettable.
Can't you think of anything but the moon?
There's nothing but the moon.
Oh my god. Can you concentrate? I know that Sears is having a sale right now on the
Sears,
washer.
forget Sears. Think of the spinning of the spin circle and the moon on the axis. It's beautiful, huh? What are you
Lovely.
doing, Kitty?
What am I doing? I'm putting on lipstick. What are you doing?
I'm
talking about the bloody moon.
Yes, the moon.
Come on.
There's nothing but the moon.
And although it was a grind, and although it was, it was kind of fast paced because every week you had to work on some kind of, written material, to film and then to edit and then put it together. And, every half year or so, we secured a theater to be able to show, the best of, material. And so it was a lot of fun, in regards to, putting a show together. And our show was much different. It was like a sketch comedy format. And we weren't actually comics or comedians or anything like that. We were just, people with a camera and ideas. And people did watch public access TV, there was no two ways about that.
SNE presents to you the music you've been waiting for thousands and thousands of years. Music from hell, devil rock, music straight from the soul of Beelzebub himself. Listen to the hit songs that are loved by millions. Listen to the following smash hit tunes straight from hell. And you thought you'd never hear it until hell froze over. But friends of Satan, here it is, Devil Rock, loved by millions. To order, dial 1-800-666-6666 for the music straight from hell. You will revel in the hit songs you are about to hear. Well, folks, hell is still hotter than sex in the oven. This music has been loved by every Satan-worshipping soul ever to step foot on earth. And the hits keep rolling on. You won't find anything like this in any store. That's why we offer it to you right now. Just dial 1-800-666-6666. Say the password Beelzebub and you get half off. You will be the envy of the block. Just by ordering now, you will have every single hit that Satan ever sang.